It's the biggest movie of the summer and probably going to be the biggest movie of the year. And my guess is this might be our longest episode we've ever done. So, as Deadpool says, maximum effort.
Deadpool and Wolverine, and we're going to talk about Hugh Jackman. Hi, this is Karan from Los Angeles.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we cover a filmmaker, actor, director, or other creative who shaped our love of movies. So join us as we explore why they matter to us before reviewing 3 of the movies in their filmography that made the biggest impact on us. We are here for Deadpool and Wolverine and Hugh Jackman. So this episode's coming out a little bit after the movie, so hopefully everyone who's listening has had a chance to see it before we get into that discussion, which will be pretty spoiler heavy for sure, because it's hard to discuss this movie without getting into all the surprises. Let's start off with Hugh Jackman, who is playing Wolverine, obviously, and has been for the last 24 years. Karan, why don't you start off with just your thoughts on Hugh and what he's meant to you over these last couple decades since he burst onto the scene in 2000?
Yeah, I feel like Hugh Jackman has sort of been omnipresent in our lives, of course, because of the Wolverine movies, but I sort of think of him maybe as, of course, barring Timothy Chalamet or whatever, but after Brad Pitt, Clooney, Julia Roberts, like that era, I feel like he's sort of the next global movie star. I think everybody knows who Hugh Jackman is. And of course, Wolverine has a big role to play in that, but I feel like he's sort of a movie star despite that, I think. And I think watching his movies and thinking about his career and such, I was like, I feel like we haven't really figured out how to use him fully. And the name that kept coming to my head was Gene Kelly. He is the Gene Kelly of our times. There are not that many people who are charming, charismatic, can dance, can sing, can act, and sort of have this kind of magnetic sort of persona to them. And that's what I think of Hugh Jackman first, actually. Somebody who's this triple threat, extremely charming, always there to kind of perform and do his best. In fact, I think of the Oscar monologue that he did the time he hosted. The first when I think of Hugh Jackman, because I think that by far is one of the best openings to the Oscar, and he's just so great. And it's kind of a shame to me, to be honest, that we've just not figured out how to use him properly. And then when he does do a movie like Greatest Showman, which I still haven't seen, it sort of ends up becoming the sleeper hit because he's incredible at all of this stuff, right? At the same time, I think it's interesting to see in the Marvel superhero universe, overload, what have you, he's sort of been like, I think, the sleeper hit character and actor, I think, in my mind at least, who's been able to not just create an impressive character with Wolverine, but actually give it a lot of pathos, and it culminates into this, highs of high with Logan. I don't think there are that many superhero characters or actors associated with them who've kind of been able to be on that sort of journey. It's a great character to begin with, the Wolverine character, but I think everybody else in the superhero universe who've done well, Marvel or DC or what have you, like they all feel like versions of who they are as people and their star persona, like Robert Downey Jr. and such, versus I think there's something about Hugh Jackman and his stage roots and musical roots and such. Like he sort of feels like an actor. Like it feels very much like a theatrical play for him, to play this character and then, like I said, inject this pathos into it. So I find that quite impressive. He could have just been a version of who he is or what the fans want or what the comic book says. And obviously I'm no comic book person, so I don't know really what I'm talking about here, but it just feels like he's made more of what this role is or could be because of who he is as an actor. I admire that in him, but I still think I wish, and we'll get into our last section of what he should do. I wish we could figure out a way to kind of use all of his gifts because he's such a talented actor, I think. And yeah, like the full package in my mind.
So Wolverine musical maybe is what you might suggest. We'll
Oh my
see at the end of the
gosh.
episode what what you will say. So for me, Hugh Jackman has just always been synonymous with Wolverine. And
Right.
yes, he is a movie star now, like you said, but to me, he embodies this character that I was a. We'll get into this when we talk more about his films, but I'm a huge comic book fan. I've been since I was a kid. X-Men I knew of and I read a little bit of, but it was never my favorite property growing up. I was much more of a DC person. So yes, I liked Wolverine, but it was Hugh Jackman that made me love Wolverine and made me really
Hmm.
love the X-Men and some of those films he was in too. And the other thing that's great about Hugh and just not only embodying this character and bringing some other things that weren't really there in the comic, and he was the breakout star in that film and of the entire Fox X-Men franchise. And yes, Wolverine obviously has been incredibly popular in the comics, so I don't want to give him all the credit for that. But what I always respected and loved about Hugh Jackman and kind of him bringing this to a whole other level for me was you could tell that he also loves Wolverine and
Hmm.
not only loves the character, but loves the fans that love the character and is always thinking about how he can bring this character to fans. He's a producer on the Wolverine trilogy that they had.
Hmm.
He's heavily involved creatively. The first one of those movies was terrible. Fans hated it. You could tell he felt bad about that, and then it was trying with those next two, which are far superior films, to correct the mistakes that were made because he feels like personally invested in the reaction to this character and the fact that he is playing Wolverine now for 24 years. That is also something that I can't think of another actor character combination in Hollywood that has gone on for that long. Like either they swap out the actor like a Batman or a James Bond, or the actor only plays the character for maybe 10 years, like a Christopher Reeve in Superman. There was only about 10 years of those movies. And I just think that is historic and why, for me, he will always be Wolverine, as much as he's does other things and is great in other movies. It's not like he's, I think, typecast, but every time I see a movie, 9 times out of 10, I'm thinking, okay, like that's Wolverine doing this. Or Hugh Jackman, because I associate him so much with that character, even though, like you point out, his star persona and his actual real life is nothing like the character he portrays, but he does such a good job of making Wolverine real and
Hmm.
three-dimensional and bringing that pathos, like you said, is very important to this character. And we'll get into it more as we cover, spoiler, several, not only Wolverine and X-Men, but several other his performances as Wolverine. And we'll get into that more there. But yeah, I think he's just a singular talent, mainly because of this Wolverine character, how he cares about it, how long he's played it. I just think that's super unique. Okay, well, let's now move on to the new movie, which is Deadpool and Wolverine. Just came out this year. Plot summary: Deadpool is offered a place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe by the Time Variance Authority, but instead recruits a variant of Wolverine to save his universe from extinction. It's directed by Sean Levy and starring Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman.
So, what did you think of the new movie?
I'll start real quickly on just like I said, huge comic book fan, read all the comics, love the MCU, love the Marvel X-Men movies. Deadpool was never a comic book character I really connected to. Like I said, I got into Marvel later, and he definitely is like the perfect character if you're like a 12-year-old to love. So I was never
Hmm.
really into him much in the comics, but I did really enjoy that first movie, especially not in X-Men Origins Wolverine. His first appearance was a disaster, but Ryan
Hmm.
Reynolds bringing Deadpool to the screen, I thought that movie was fantastic. The second one was okay, good, but not as funny and groundbreaking as the first one. But this movie I absolutely loved. I thought it was the best of the Deadpool movies, and so far, for sure, my favorite movie of the year.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I had an excellent time at the theater seeing it. I thought the movie succeeded on the humor with the pathos, with giving me, like, I laughed, I cried, I got all the emotions in this movie too. And then seeing Hugh Jackman come back, which I was very worried about and disappointed in when they initially announced this movie, because him ending his performance in Logan was so incredible and just a crowning achievement in film and in comic book movies, and so good that I was like, are they gonna ruin this in some way? And I think Hugh Jackman brought it like hard in this movie, and really especially juxtaposed against what Ryan Reynolds was doing, and the tone of this film being so much different than Logan. They really relied on Hugh to be the one serious part of this movie, even more so than Deadpool, who definitely can get serious at times. And I thought a couple scenes that he did were absolute standouts that we'll get into more as we get into the film. But yeah, I had a fantastic time. We'll definitely be seeing it again in theaters. The first movie of the year, I can say that about. Like, having left it, I'm like, I have to see this again
Hmm.
within the next 2 weeks. What about you? And again, like, what, I can't recall if you'd seen the Deadpool films before, how familiar you
Yeah.
are with Wade Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, no secret, I'm not a big comic book person, but actually, before even Deadpool, going back to X-Men, I will say I think the first X-Men movie came at a time where maybe I was the most ripe, I guess, to kind of watch a movie like that. And I remember really enjoying it, even though there are parts of it that sort of drag and such, and we'll, potentially get into that. But found Wolverine very interesting and exciting. And I do love the concept of sort of mutants and sort of what's happening with them. And of course, I at some point gave up with that whole franchise, but I stayed with it, I think, for a little bit. Like even the James McAvoy Fassbender movies
Mm.
are actually quite fun, First Class and such. I quite enjoy them, actually. It's one of the few comic book movies that I actually own is that
Oh,
one.
first class.
Because I found that really fun and really cool.
Mhm.
But Deadpool, I had no familiarity with this character, but the first movie was actually really fun, really enjoyed it. The whole story behind the making of it and how Ryan Reynolds kind of got it together, all that was pretty admirable, but also it was funny and just felt kind of groundbreaking at that time. I didn't watch the second one because I don't know, there wasn't, by then my superhero fatigue was, I guess, setting in, so I
Mhm.
just didn't. I have to burst your bubble with this one, which is that I don't know, maybe just the headspace I was in or where I am now, this whole Ryan Reynolds shtick of sort of self-aware and these jokes, I just cannot get past it. And I understand why they are fun and funny. And in this movie, especially, like he's really, taking on the superhero universe, the
Mhm.
corporations, and the whole thing of real life and what's happening in the movie. It's interwoven in the plot of the movie, but also interwoven in the character and this constant fourth wall breaking and all of that and music and blood and it just is so self-aware that I just can't really get past it. I understand why this would be fun at an intellectual level, but it's just not for me. I
Mhm.
just that's sort of that. But I will say Hugh is amazing. He commits, that's the thing. Whenever he shows up, whatever he does, he commits to it. And you can see the thread line or the through line of this character. Like you were saying, who's played a character for so long. And I was worried too when they announced this movie for, obviously topping what he did in Logan, but
Mhm.
also, this episode is being recorded on the heels of Robert Downey Jr. going back to the MCU.
Mhm.
I had a similar reaction. I was like, go do something else. Like, you've done this, you've proven you've reached the highest high. So I was like, oh, there we go again, cash grab, what have you. But he brings it in the movie, and that made me happy. And he, looks great. Like, this is an older man,
Yeah.
and I don't know how this is still going on, but looks amazing. And that was the fun part for me to watch him. And it was sort of even emotional at times to see him go back to this character and carry this through line. And you can see the build up. But yeah, otherwise, no.
Yeah, I thought the scene, especially when they were in the Honda Odyssey, and Logan basically rips into Deadpool and yells at him and basically like tearing him down because the Deadpool character, what makes him, I think, interesting and works so well is that he is much like a teenager where
Right.
he makes fun of everything because he's hiding like internal pain that he cannot address. The first movie that was the pain of him getting
Mm-hmm.
cancer and then, breaking up with his girlfriend or not being able to be with his girlfriend. And the second movie, it was about the loss because the girlfriend dies and he has to deal with that. And in this movie, it's this feeling of rejection that he is trying to grapple with. And again, that's the meta comment on the whole corporate mergers and being laid
Right.
off and all these things that are the larger themes of the film. But and Logan just like basically like dresses him down and he does it even at the end. I think he says like, what, do you have nothing to say? Like for once he Deadpool doesn't have anything to say because he's really calling him out for who he actually is and calling out his pain and like why he's covering it up with all this adolescent humor. And I think Hugh Jackman's performance in that scene is rivals a lot of the things that he even did in Logan for me. And that is something that you can tell because he is been with this character for so long and feels authentic to what that version
Mm-hmm.
of Wolverine from that universe would do and be that direct. It just that scene especially was a standout
I
for
agree.
Hugh as well. And I just don't think anyone else could have pulled something like that off if he had not been with this character for so long, which, yeah, you can say maybe initially cash grab, but see, I think that's what separates again like Hugh from
Mm-hmm.
other actors, because he would never do a cash grab for Wolverine. Like I believe, because he
He
cares so much
cares.
about the character and how audiences would react to it. He would only come back, and he did if it was done right. Which again, I think they definitely, checked every single box here on how they were bringing Wolverine back, the purpose it served in the movie, how it went back again to that theme of how you deal with feeling rejected and like you don't matter. And that
Yeah.
Wolverine kind of struggles with that in this movie too. And I think that what Hugh can bring as a good actor to this role really helps a lot too. But more so on the movie overall, and the things that worked for me too were the cameos in the movie. I call them cameos, but they were more like actual like guest appearances
Right.
from several of the older Marvel characters from Fox, like Elektra and Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four movies. Like they brought these characters in, and it was cool to see these actors back in these roles, especially Blade, which like I
Right.
thought that was just I died. I screamed. That was incredible. Those movies mean so much to me. Wesley Snipes looked amazing. He even quoted the ice skating line, which is like one of the best lines that ever uttered in any movie. He, quoted that again. And I love the little dig at the Marvel Blade movie too, about there's only going to be one Blade. Like that was incredible. People love that line. But they brought these people in not just to be like, oh, here's some cameo porn. Like, oh, look, who that it's this person, it's this person. It's like, no, they fit again. These were all rejected characters. They weren't bringing back the McAvoy, Professor X, or these characters that are already still popular. These were characters that either might have been rejected at the time, like that Elektra movie totally failed,
Hmm.
or people have sort of forgotten about. And I think that fits in really well with the theme. And they got to have big action scenes. And I like how they didn't die on the screen. I was worried they were like, oh no, are they going to go here and protect Ryan Reynolds, Wade Wilson and Logan at the end, and they all die, and we have to watch Blade die? Like, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And they didn't. They sort of like disappeared into a cloud. I really like that. And then, speaking of characters and actors, I don't know if you're that familiar with the Channing Tatum Gambit thing.
Right. Right.
That
Yeah.
also was just like amazing to see a character who didn't even make it to the screen. He was so rejected. Like
Right.
Channing Tatum was actually rejected by Disney when they bought Fox. They canceled that movie immediately. And that was his passion project that he was working on for several years. And his dream was to play this role. So it was meta comment here with having him come in. And that was so great. I mean, he is such a good, talented comedic actor that I don't think that's maybe the way he would have played Gambit in the movie if he actually had made a real Gambit movie, but dialed that up to 11 in terms of the humor. But that cameo stuff worked really well. Had you seen any of those movies? The Elektra movie, the Blades, the
Blade,
Fantastic
of course,
Four?
I've seen, but I don't think I've seen Electra, but very familiar, obviously. That's the thing, right? Like these are failed quote unquote movies. I mean, not Blade, but some of the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still sort of in the pop culture because of what happened. But yeah, I get it, right? Like if you grew up with this and if you're really bought in to the whole thing, like this is like amazing, right? Like all your favorite people, especially the ones that you grew up with and are quote unquote not popular or successful, like seeing all of that is kind of amazing. But I kept thinking, like, what are they trying to do here? Because in some ways this movie is sort of rejecting superhero madness and multiversal madness and all of this, right? And saying and making fun of it, but then also in a way like revering these older past characters and
Mm-hmm.
sort of harkening back to like that time when this was not so commercialized and maybe purer or what have you. But in doing so, it sort of ends up being kind of deeper fan service, right? Which in some ways they are poking fun off as well, not of the fans, but just
Mm-hmm.
kind of what this whole thing has become now. So it's an interesting kind of commentary, more from like a business standpoint than even like a storytelling standpoint. I don't know. For somebody who's like a casual watcher of all of this, even though because I, follow the business and what have you,
Mm-hmm.
my head kept going in that direction of like, oh, this is maybe why they're doing this. And that too kind of took me out of the movie a lot, to be honest. I don't know. It's an interesting experiment. I'm glad that they tried, especially given where superhero movies are. We are sort of in the low point of it, and this movie obviously doing really well and
Yeah.
such. So
Yeah.
happy for that. But yeah, it's an interesting exercise. I kept wondering, who is this for? Is this for everybody? Is this for just for the fans? Is it for the older fans who grew up with all this? Like, what is the point?
Yeah, I think what this movie does successfully I think, is it does all of that. Like it has
Yeah.
the older, again, those Fox Fantastic Four movie from like at this point almost 20 years ago now that maybe if you're 12, you don't even know that existed. But if you were 12 at the time, that might have been your favorite movie. I mean, I don't like those films, but there are people that actually
I
stand
still
by those.
enjoyed it from my memory
Yeah,
of them. Is like,
yeah,
they were
I
fun
didn't at
when
the
they came
time,
out.
but it was fun to see Johnny Storm back. And then they
Yeah.
have that brilliant montage in the beginning of the film where he's going through all the different comic book versions of Wolverine, and
I
seeing
know.
some of those on screen was just incredible. So that ticks a box for, the hardcore X-Men fans, or just the fans of X-Men that recognize, oh yeah, that's the cover from that Uncanny X-Men issue. Oh, this is Age of
Right.
Apocalypse Wolverine. Comic book accurate height size Wolverine was
Right.
just incredible. And I'm like, yeah, I remember at the time being really upset they cast Hugh Jackman in the role because I'm like, he's like 6 feet tall. This is stupid. This isn't going to work. Like back in 2000. And now that just sort of shows that, like, no, you can't always be comic book accurate. Sometimes that looks ridiculous, like it did there. So that ticks the box there for those fans. I think just the humor, like Ryan Reynolds' shtick, is pretty broad. A lot of
Yeah.
the humor that he's doing that isn't the meta commentary piece. I think they're kind of why this movie works and is being so successful right now at the box office. And I do think it'll probably end up being the biggest movie of the year, is because for Marvel is back to, I think, going more broad with the appeal instead of the last couple of their movies. I think had really just been playing to not only just comic book fans, but just fans of the MCU. Like you have to have seen every movie, you have to watch all these shows, you
Right.
have to be really into what they're doing to get any enjoyment out of it. I mean, the last Marvel movie I saw, which was the Marvels, it was a Friday night Chinese theater, big theater here in LA, and there was about 20% of the theater was full. Like
Mhm.
no one really responded well to the movie versus this I saw opening night at the Chinese theater, completely packed, people in,
Right.
t-shirts, and, the audience going crazy. I mean, geez, that scene when Wolverine puts his mask on was
Yeah.
insane. Like he reached his hands back there and I literally screamed like, "Oh my God, they're about to do what we've wanted them to do for 24 years." And then everyone's sort of erupting. So it's bringing a lot of that feeling back, which I
But
also was
isn't
fun
all that
as a
just for
theater.
the fans then? From everything you said to me, it's just for the fans.
Well, it's the different levels of the fans is what I mean. Like the
Right.
comic book fans, the fans of the movie that also never got to see him in a comic book, accurate suit, or doesn't have the mask on. And these X-Men movies were really popular, but they were popular with more. And we'll get into this when we get into some of these films too. I think they weren't just aimed at the nerd audience. Those
Right.
original X-Men films, they were, because there was no nerd audience yet. They
Right.
created that, I think. So that's what I thought the movie was successful at doing, like ticking those boxes for all the different types of people to be going to the movies, instead of just, okay, well, have you seen the TV show? Well, if you haven't, like, you got to
Yeah.
go back and
That
watch
part
7 episodes of
definitely.
this.
Yeah.
And like, even though they made fun of that in the movie, obviously with
Yeah.
Loki season 2, the cloud thing appearing, but it doesn't really, it's a joke. It's not important for your enjoyment out of the film,
Yeah.
is what I thought was so well handled.
I do agree with that, that it's not doing the whole you have to have seen everything and such. But I do think in doing what they did, it sort of is for the super fans, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that bucket is slightly bigger than the absolute Marvel fan bucket that sort of watch everything, but it still is for the super fans. The hat on the hat on the hat on the hat thing is sort of the thing that,
You don't respond to that.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
respond to that. And maybe a lot of it has to do with just Ryan Reynolds
Mm.
personally. I mean, I don't know. The guy, I'm sure he's fine, but like all of this stuff of Free Guy and such, like, I mean, sure, this is a Deadpool character, but I feel like he's the same across the board. That's sort of what he's become now.
Well, I think
And
what was so brilliant about him, though, is he
yeah.
was Deadpool. Like his screen persona and his type of humor was Deadpool before he was even cast in it.
Right,
It's one of those like perfect blending of this
right,
is who you are and this is who this character's been for, 10, 15 years in the comics. So you're like dream casting for this.
right.
It matches. And that's why it feels like Ryan Reynolds, but it's Wade Wilson because they're both kind of one and the same in terms of
And
their
that's
their
the
brand
thing,
of
right? If you
humor.
don't like either
That's
of
true.
them or
It's not
both
gonna
of
work.
them, then it's not gonna work. And
Yeah.
I'm in that camp. Like, honestly, I would love to maybe bring somebody else, like a fresher person, and have like a different take on it. I don't know. But
Oh, to play Deadpool.
yeah,
Oh, geez, no way. No, no,
no
that's
way.
that. No, and the same thing with Hugh Jackman. I think in this movie he proved there can't be until, and like they said in the movie, we'll be playing this till you're 90. That's fine with
Yeah,
me. Like I don't think they
that
should
I'm okay
recast
with.
this. I think this proved it to me that like he is Wolverine even at his age of like almost 60 now. Like he's got the abs, looks
Yeah,
amazing. He's got the chest, looks amazing. Still can pull off those those action scenes. But just one other thing I want to end on, I guess, in terms of my thoughts, was actually the ending of the movie itself. So I mentioned I
Mm.
laughed a lot, which I did. I think it was the funniest movie. But I have to admit, the ending surprisingly made me cry. And this was actually as actually one thing too, like listeners of this podcast will know, I love whenever a movie ends with a blooper reel, behind the scenes, or a dance montage. And this movie was surprised out of nowhere, ended with a montage of the X-Men franchise of the last 24 years and of these behind the scenes of,
Mm.
Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart, with a couple interviews of Hugh Jackman talking about how he first loves Wolverine, and Ryan Reynolds talking about he loves Deadpool, set to Green Day's Good Riddance, Time of Your Life. Out of nowhere, this thing just pops up after this, very funny movie, and it's this incredibly heartfelt montage that honestly, like I'm a sucker for when the song plays. It some, it gives me emotional. I love Green Day, but yeah, this just really hit me of like, wow, these movies were really important to me. I mean, you can tell it was clearly important to all the people working on these films. Like, again, we mentioned about how much Hugh Jackman really cares about the character, and same thing with Ryan Reynolds. But just that love of them on the set having such a good time, just reminiscing like, damn, this is 24 years of my life, thinking about all the times that I went to the X-Men 2 premiere with my friends. They had a promotion for the Daredevil Fox movie where if you bought this popcorn at a certain theater, you get a DVD with an exclusive trailer before the movie came out. And we were like in college, like driving around trying to find like the popcorn bucket, and just all the people I saw all these midnight movies with of the X-Men films over the last 24 years. Even if the movie sucked, like X-Men Origins Wolverine, like I remember all these things, like the friends that I went there with, the people that I'm not friends with anymore, some of the friends I'm still friends with now. And like all these memories are coming back to me, and just how important these movies were to me and how long they've been in our lives. And it was an ending of a chapter. Like this movie was like a goodbye to these pre-MCU
Hmm.
Marvel films, which was the beginning of all this, more innocent
Right.
times. And yeah, that just ending also on a song that is about goodbye, and starting on a song, actually, the opening montage, the In Sync, Bye 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 too, sort of like bookends the films on farewells, which I think is a lot of what this movie also is about, like sort of accepting that things end, and whether you get laid off or feel rejected, sometimes it's just part of life. And I don't know, I just started crying in the theater.
Oh my
The second that it
gosh.
started, I'm like, oh my God, are they doing this? And at first I thought it was gonna be like a joke thing. And then I'm like, oh my God, they're playing this serious. Uh-oh, I'm not gonna be able to hold back. That I left the theater just with this warm feeling inside of just how important these movies were to me because of that montage. I don't know if you got similarly choked up or it already halfway out the theater at that point, because you're like, I gotta get the hell out of here. But yeah, that
Yeah.
I was not expecting that, and it just really touched me. It touched
Yeah.
me in all the right ways.
No, I get it, like when you've had that sort of an association and, your life and friendships and relationships, they're all tied to these movies. It obviously will land on you or anybody in a totally
Hmm.
different way. So I get that. I obviously didn't have that, but even I mean, I didn't choke up or anything, but it was a little bit of a walk down memory lane for sure. Because, we were of that age at that time, and
Hmm.
all of this life was ahead of us. So much has happened, these are sort of the critical years of our lives, the last 20 years. So, you can't help but not think that. But yeah, to me, like I said, like the meta-ness and the self-awareness of it all, even in this aspect, even though it's sincere, it's still very self-aware. All of that is, I don't know. It's not for me.
Best movie of the year so far for me.
Well, that's good, I mean, it's been a bit of a drier spell.
Yeah, and I'm glad it's connected to the box office too. I think
Yeah.
the industry needs to have a bigger jolt in the arm. And I knew this was coming, and I suspected it was going to be huge, but it's also nice to see that hashtag movies are back. We can say it again.
Mhm.
People a month ago, there were all these think pieces about, oh, cinema's dead. I'm like, guys, like, calm down. Like, this is stupid.
Yeah, we
Why are
already
we
had $1 billion movie and
Yeah,
Inside Out 2.
exactly.
So
Like, why are we even doing this every time one movie kind of a
yeah,
bad movie doesn't do well? You're freaking out. So I'm glad that this sort of puts all that to
yeah.
rest. Okay, let's then get into our examination on Hugh Jackman. So, what we'll do here for new listeners, we're going to go over three films, each of us picking one, that mean a lot to us in different ways. So, the first one we'll go over is Our First Love. This is the movie that made the first impression on Hugh Jackman on us. The second is the masterpiece. This is the movie we feel that Hugh made that resonates the most with us personally, and we think it is his best performance for us. And then finally, wild card. This could be really any other movie that Hugh did, whether it's something that he tried and really worked and took a risk. He maybe took a risk and it didn't work. It's a movie that maybe no one talks about that we think is a hidden gem. It could be any one of these things. So that's the why it is called wild card. So, Karan, why don't we start with you? What is your first love of Mr. Hugh Jackman?
So I chose Kate and Leopold from 2001, directed by James Mangold, starring Hugh Jackman, of course, Meg Ryan, Leo Schreiber, quick logline on the movie. An English duke from 1876 is inadvertently dragged to modern day New York, where he falls for a plucky advertising executive. So I cheated a little bit because I was trying to remember that was it the X-Men movie, the first one that I saw him first in, or this one? I think it's in the
Mhm.
same year
Yeah,
or
roughly within a year. Yeah, I think it's within a
within a
year of each other.
year.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just, going back to what I said up front of like, I associate Hugh Jackman, of course, with Wolverine, like everybody else, but also with just a lot of charm and charisma and persona. And I wanted to pick something from that early era where he's basically, dialed up charm and charisma and handsomeness and everything up to the 20, on a scale of 10.
Hmm.
It's incredible. I mean, this movie overall, I don't know if you've seen it before, but I had seen it, of course, before because I do like rom-coms. The movie's fine, although I had no idea that James Mangold actually directed
Yeah,
this.
it's
So it's
crazy.
fun that
Yeah, I was like,
they've
oh, interesting.
been,
Yeah.
yeah, in this kind of friendship partnership for all this time, which is kind of fun actually. But the movie's fine, it's really good moments, but the good moments are all because of him, because he's just so great. And I mean, this is a farcical premise, that you can only buy into it and can only be on the ride if you actually believe that this person, Hugh Jackman's character, is like from a different time and how they would be in modern times, and the whole fish out of water side of it is all super fun, but very grounded and real. That's the thing with Hugh Jackman, is that he commits, like we've been saying,
Hmm.
and sometimes that commitment can come off as, theater good energy and maybe a little hokey and such, which, depending on who's emitting that, can be annoying versus charming. In Hugh's case, I always find it charming.
Hmm.
But in this case, that's not the case. I think he is playing a real character, and everybody around him in the movie, just like everybody around watching the movie, you can't help but admire him and like him and fall for him. It's all happening, So, and I don't think you get the career that he's had if people didn't see this side of him,
Hmm.
And that's why I wanted to put this movie on the table. The big weak point of this movie, as much as I like Meg Ryan, is I think her and sort of their chemistry. It just doesn't really work. And I think this movie is still quite fun despite that. So on this rewatch, which I had not seen this movie in a long, 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 long time, I was like, I wish they had a different actress here. And this movie actually could be really fun, and really good, and kind of be in that pantheon of great rom-coms from this era. I mean, this is sort of the last of it. We are approaching the end of the rom-com. Well, yeah, the good
Ish.
ones at
That, yeah,
least.
right. Yeah, I know. Like for that, the 90s sort of
Yeah,
big budget Hollywood ones. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I wish that was different. But overall, okay movie with good moments. He's amazing.
Yeah, I'd never seen this before. I'd always know of it. I mean, I
Mm.
remember seeing the trailers, being like, this looks really silly. And it
Right.
definitely is. It's a movie full of silly hijinks and tomfoolery, basically,
Yeah.
which, your mileage may vary on that. I didn't really find it that good, though. I think the Hugh Jackman, to your point, was what kept it not from being boring. It
Yeah.
just felt like a sitcom to me, like a sitcom setup. Like, oh, the ex lives upstairs. People come in and out of the
Yeah.
apartment via the window, like Kramer, like bursting in, like on Seinfeld.
Yeah.
She's still friends with her ex for some reason, which again feels like a sitcom setup. But then a
Yeah.
wacky person shows up out of nowhere, and who is it? It's this guy from the past. And like, how do
Yeah.
we? I'm like,
It's
okay, this is
all
like a
very
pilot.
weird.
Yeah, it felt like too much like a sitcom, which just was
Totally.
kind of like, eh. And then the time travel logic was sort of weird. And I didn't, to your point, I think I also thought Meg Ryan did not do a good job. The description you read said she was plucky. I didn't think she
Yeah.
was plucky at all. She was kind of bland and boring. And like, the chemistry between them to me was absolutely not there. But Hugh Jackman is having a great time and he can pull off that I don't want to say like overacting, but like this larger, more broad performance, but it doesn't feel broad. It feels like a real guy
Right.
who is transported into the present day. But it does feel, yeah, like what you said, theater kid energy. I think you
Yeah.
need that in this role to make it work. And if
Yeah.
you're playing it either too serious or too self-aware, it just wouldn't work.
Right.
And I think that Hugh is the right person to make this movie in this role, though I don't really think this movie was necessarily needed to be
Movie's
made.
not.
Like I didn't really enjoy it, which kind of this podcasts and all these movies you keep bringing in just keeps making me try to do this self-examination on like, why did I find this movie not to work for me at all with these big Hollywood, big budget, big stars in New York, whereas there's this Hallmark movie that they made where a nutcracker gets pulled from the past into the present in like a bakery in upstate California, and I like love it, and I'm like everything about it, I'm like, this works for me. It's so romantic, it's so fun. But like when it's dialed to this level, it just does. It's just weird. I need to. There's some thesis I'm trying to develop. So I appreciate you when you bring it in these '90s rom-com movies, or everyone. I'm like, this doesn't work. But if this starred a washed-up '80s sitcom star who's now she's 45 and it's set in filmed in Canada and like on a shoestring budget, I would love it. It's just weird, but
I just
that I,
I don't
I
know
don't
what to
get it.
tell you.
I
I
don't
think
know
it
either.
needs some
As
examination,
as we
clearly.
move through this podcast, at some point, I will have a thesis on why this is the case, but I love that you keep dropping these in here. It's fun. It was also fun to see Liev Schreiber in this movie, too, who then plays Wolverine's brother in X-Men
Right.
Origins. Seeing the two of them on screen this early, I'm like, oh, that's cool. It's Sabretooth and Wolverine.
Yeah.
Who are related also in this movie, aren't they? Yeah, they're related, I
No.
think, right? They're not related.
No,
I
no,
thought
no.
he was like his great grand some son or something. That's why he was trying to find him,
Oh,
but maybe
I
not. Maybe
maybe I
not.
missed that part, but yeah, I
Okay.
don't think so. Yeah, I mean, as you said that, it made me think that, this is what I grew up in, like these rom-coms, we would go as a family. A lot
Hmm.
of these actually made it to India. Of course, the superhero movies made over there too. And that's why I do have a fondness for the X-Men movies, because it was
Hmm.
the right time. But a lot of these movies came over there on VHS, and I
Right.
have like fond memories of just like sitting and watching them as a family dinner and a movie thing at home. And so I have like that fondness, I guess, to them,
Hmm.
even though I can totally see obviously that a lot of them are not great. And like this one obviously isn't. But they're always good moments, which
Hmm.
I appreciate that. I mean, this is very hard to do, like how do you make a good rom-com? I think it's one of the hardest thing to do because it has to be entertaining and fun and funny. And even though there's a farcical thing at the center of it, you have to believe it and buy into it.
Hmm.
You need great chemistry, you need great stars, you need a great supporting cast to build a world. Like all of this is like super hard to do. So that's why, we are at a time now where these don't even exist or barely,
Hmm.
But I think this is sort of the last leg of it, if you will. And it's still charming. And I think, like we both said, it's because of him, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I was thinking about Prestige, which we covered in our Nolan episode. I don't think Hugh Jackman works over there. Like the theater energy and the hamminess is just too much for me because that movie is serious. And this is also Nolan is sort of overly serious, on all of his like this is like a movie and all of that, that we talked about in that episode. So
Hmm.
listeners, if you want to, listen to that, you can. But here, I think it's more earnest, and the whole tone of the movie is sort of sitcom and silly, like you said. So it sort of works better, I think. So that was kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. Like if this is, I think maybe his first movie after X-Men. So at this point, he's now like a hot new star.
Right.
And I think this is a good choice for him to
Yeah.
let's try a different genre. I don't want to typecast as Wolverine. Maybe I don't want to play him for 24 years. Let me try something else. And this is the right rom-com setup and vehicle for him. It's just the movie around him. I just don't think
Yeah.
kind of works. And we're also catching Meg Ryan, even though I've never been a fan of hers, but you cannot argue this is at the tail end of her,
Absolutely.
America's
It's kind
sweetheart
of a
phase.
strange casting,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
have an upcoming new hot star, like you bring somebody else, maybe, or to be fair to her, like give her more to do with this role, and
Hmm.
this is also Mangold maybe earlier in his career and such, so still sort of figuring things out, maybe. So, because she can obviously play the awkward, sort of bumbling, sort of unsure, and maybe a little aloof sort of character. So there are elements of that in here, but it's just not used very well. So yeah, it's just unfortunate.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think because the Leopold character in Hugh Jackman is so just fantastical in terms of the premise, that she's almost playing the straight man to that. And
Yeah,
her character doesn't really have
it's just dead.
motivation, do anything. Like, what is she really there for other than just to be on screen with this crazy character from the past? And now he's in New York
Yeah,
and like, what is a toaster? Ah, like that stuff.
I
Like
know.
she can't have a character, or they don't at least write her one, because then
Yeah,
the
she
movie
doesn't
would
have
feel off
anything.
balance, and that's too bad. Like, I
It's
think
too bad.
she needs more, because she's not. Maybe this is me, just my own personal, but she's not enough of magnetic personality to carry a character which has no character. Like, she
Yeah.
needs something to do. She can't just get by on her America's sweetheart whatever thing
No,
alone. And
exactly.
this,
Yeah.
maybe why she didn't last as long as like a Julie Roberts or something in terms of her star power. But I don't
Yeah,
know.
there's some of that, but I think, like you said, I think it's also what movie you're in and who are you opposite, like
Hmm.
that stuff is just so dialed up that I think Meg is really good at sort of like her specialty is understated charm. She
Right.
also is a charm machine, but it's very understated. It's sort of awkward and aloof, and it works in different kinds of movies. Or you give her more to do, with a different script, a different director, or what have you. And none of that sort of panned out here. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. The one thing also I just want to point out again at the very, very end of the movie, I always watch the credits. And there's a subplot in this film where Hugh Jackman is basically inventing the elevator in
oh
his time
yeah.
period. And there's a notice at the end that basically like explains who actually invented the elevator and giving that person credit. And I
Mm.
thought that was kind of, it's Otis, the Otis
Yeah,
elevator
yeah,
company. I don't know
yeah.
if anyone's ever sat in an elevator and saw the word Otis,
Right.
but I thought, like, why do they have to? This is weird. It's just like, oh, just so you know, in this year, this person invented the elevator. It's the Otis Elevator Company. I'm like, okay, like, because what we thought I'd watch the movie and think that it was this like made up like English lord or something. Like, maybe there was some deal with the Otis Elevator Company. I just thought that was funny to put that at the end of the credits. Like, why do you need to do this? Like, who's walking into this and being like, damn, that's cool. Some guy who traveled through time invented the elevator. This is what an amazing than a truthful film. Like, it's just weird. I don't know if you caught that or if you ever noticed that
I
before.
didn't catch
But
that.
it's like one of the last things in the credits. I was like, oh, is that supposed to be a joke? Or like, did the Otis Elevator Company make them put it in? Because they're like, you're defaming us, thinking that, not giving credit to our great great grandfather, Mr. Otis, who spent all this work inventing the pulley system or whatever the hell. I don't know how elevators work. It could be Harry Potter magic for all I know. I just get in it and hope it goes up or down.
Yeah, I don't know
Weird.
why they did that. Maybe some sponsorship thing, but I think it's kind of cute.
I know, no, it made me laugh.
Yeah.
It was cute and it made me laugh more so than most of the rest of the movie did. But that's why I wanted just to call that. I'm like, hey, just people like stay to the end of the credits and you'll get a nice little surprise to the Otis L. And you might learn something. It teaches you. King Leopold educates you.
Okay, what is your first love for Hugh Jackman?
So my first love is X-Men from the year 2000.
Mhm.
IMDb plot summary: in a world where mutants, evolved superpowered humans, exist and are discriminated against, two groups form an inevitable clash: the Supremacist Brotherhood and the Pacifist X-Men. This is directed by Bryan Singer, starring Patrick Stewart, Hugh Jackman, Ian McKellen, Famke Jensen, and Halle Berry. I mean, this was obvious, and like you were even saying, you couldn't remember which one you had necessarily saw first. Saw this movie opening weekend. Like I said at the outset, I was read some X-Men comics, seen the cartoon show, played the arcade game, but I was much more of a DC fan, so X-Men didn't like mean a lot to me when I first saw this movie. Though I was going with a bunch of people from an internship that I had, and they were all X-Men obsessives. So this was like the biggest thing for the summer for them, waiting until X-Men came out. And I was familiar with the Wolverine character, obviously thought he was cool. No one can not think Logan is cool. But Hugh Jackman does steal this movie from a lot of other just incredible actors. I mean, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen,
Mhm.
who are perfectly cast. Like, there is
Yeah,
Professor
they're
X,
great.
Patrick Stewart, like, people have been talking about that in Wizard magazine for like 10 years, and they finally did it, and he's amazing. But the standout of this movie is Wolverine. Yes, as a character, but I do think it's what Hugh Jackman brings to this role, which is the pathos and the emotion to what Logan is dealing with. And you feel like he is a fully fleshed out character, not just some insane, crazy, guys who goes into berserker rage. He's got these claws, or someone who's too cool for school, which he does play that role too, which I'll get into in a second. But there's just these smaller scenes that he has, especially with the rogue character played by Anna Paquin, that really just make you feel, wow, like he is embodying a person here, and it's not just a character, especially the scene. And I remember this at the time when he first picks up Rogue and they're traveling in the car. And
Mhm.
this is after he has the initial fight where he shows his claws, and which is awesome. Everyone cheering at that. But Rogue asks him, "Oh, like, does it hurt when the claws come out?" And he just says, "Every time."
Every
And just
single
that
time. Yeah.
that delivery is just, I'm like, oh, I remember in the theater, like, whoa, like, and everyone just sort of went silent. It's like bringing this level of depth to the Logan character, which, Hugh Jackman pulled off too. Yes, it's the writing, which is, I definitely want to give credit to that, but just it's Hugh. And I think the reason why he's so beloved as Wolverine, and the reason why he's been in this character for 24 years, and like I said earlier, I don't hope they never recast, and, as long as he was with us, is because he brings this pathos to the
Yeah.
character. And this is when I first realized that and fell in love with Hugh and Wolverine and the X-Men. It all, for me, all those things started with this movie. So I'll talk more about the film as a whole, but just curious on your thoughts and first impressions when you saw this and what you thought of Hugh in the film.
Yeah, pretty much the same. And we've sort of said this before, so I think we'll just keep it short. But you feel in these movies, typically the stakes are really low and they start to kind of muddle, and especially as these movies kind of became bigger and bigger, even more so, like the classic kind of CGI war and what are
Mm-hmm.
the stakes? Who gets hurt? What at all? And I think in that scene that you mentioned, which is pretty early, like you see he delivers it, but he carries that pain inside of him, it's all on him, without even saying it actually. And that sort of makes it real. And that's what I'm always looking for, because I don't have that sort of 12-year-old boy comic book connection that you just here to see your idols that you were growing up with on the big screen. I don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's about, okay, who are these characters? What do they bring? What are their struggles? What makes them tick or not tick? And you get all of that from him. And as we've been talking about this, because his background is theatrical, I almost feel like Hugh maybe took on this character as, some sort of like a tragic figure from Shakespeare or Greek mythology or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. Like that's his into this. And that's why maybe he cares and loves it so much and has been with it. And you see that in the portrayal. I think it's the right packaging as well, because again, theatrical sort of actors can be over the top, and Hugh is over the top. But I think it works because this person and this character, like it carries its rage on him and inside of him. And you get to kind of see that plucked in different directions as the franchise, goes in its culmination in Logan, which most likely we'll get to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean that sort of was a standout when I first watched it for sure. But also the world building, I had not seen anything like this before, and I obviously had not read the comic books, and I found all of that really interesting, of like how all these people are coming together, what their powers are. They're all rejected from society, and what are the motivations of people on all sides, so all that was very interesting. I had not seen this movie in a while. I'm very curious to hear how you felt about the movie watching it this time. I found the movie quite slow and quite a drag. Of course, the first, I would say, three-fourth of or one-fourth of it is pretty exciting when you meet Wolverine and Rogue, and kind of the lead up to the university and all of that is kind of fun. But then after that, it starts to drag quite a bit, as James Marsden and Jean Grey, and I didn't like Halle Berry in this role even when I
She's
first watched it.
Yeah,
I
she's not a good
remember it
actress.
so
I'll say it.
clearly,
She's not
because
a good
they gave her
actress.
nothing to do, and it's such a
Yeah.
boring character in general, at least the way it's portrayed in these movies. But at the pacing of the movie felt really slow, which I've said this on the podcast often. I love when characters are allowed to breathe and you're not just jump cuts all the way, but it has to be for a reason. This just feels like dead air in a movie like this, and it feels pretty jarring because when Hugh is on screen, it's like at a different level, and then things just start to kind of fall. So that was my experience rewatching the movie. But this is still a fond memory, I think, just because it was the one of the first ones, and like I said, that's why I stayed with this franchise.
Yeah, I think that this movie is quaint in a way. And I think a lot of the
Yeah.
things you were just mentioning with the dead, the dead space, the sort of not the big spectacle was because this was $70 million in 2000. This was not a big budget movie. No one believed that this would turn into a 24-year franchise. Yes, Blade had existed and that movie was a hit in 98, but this is pre-Spider-Man. This was the movie that started the entire comic book movie genre that we're in right now. Redefine the genre more so than Burton's Batman or Donner's Superman. And I think you can tell that it is slower because they don't have the money. They can't really create much of a spectacle. And I think Bryan Singer, to his credit, even though I mean he's one of the few people that deserves to be canceled, the guy is a horrible person. However, the take on what this movie is trying to do, which is like, let's not make this movie for the fans. The fans will show up. We have to make the regular audiences care about the X-Men. Who are they? What are the stakes? What's the politics of this world? What is each character's motivation? They spent all that time making you care about these characters, not just because, oh, I get to see Wolverine with his mask on, which they don't do. Oh, I get to see Wolverine in comic book accurate outfits, which they don't do that either. They're not giving the comic book fans what they want other than a big budget X-Men movie. Like, hey, you're getting an X-Men movie, so we don't need to tick all these other boxes. We're actually going to focus on a wider audience and telling a really compelling story with compelling characters and not just trying to throw in a bunch of little winks and nods to the fans because we know they're going to be there, which at the time we were not, as fans, frustrated by that. It was just the fact that, again, I wasn't a huge X-Men fan, but all the people that I were with, they were like, oh my God, I got to see the X-Men on a big screen, treated seriously. This is amazing. They weren't complaining about, oh, why the people in leather outfits, black leather instead of the yellow outfits? Why is Wolverine not in a mask? Why? I mean, these things kind of come up, but you immediately just brush them aside because the movie is good, and we never had anything like this at the time. It was really groundbreaking. Though I definitely will admit for sure, like the movie is not the best X-Men movie. X2 is much better. And it gets bigger and more interesting. But I think the fact that they were trying to do something so different makes it feel a little bit more like this movie off to the side that maybe Fox wasn't really thinking was going to be this big of a hit. So they got to try to experiment and do something different. I mean, the movie opens with in a Holocaust scene. Like, whoever would have thought.
When I first rewatched it, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have no memory of this. What is happening?
Yeah. Like a comic book movie starting like at a concentration camp, like oh my gosh, like that. But that at the time was like also very groundbreaking and revolutionary. So is this a perfect movie? No. It still works for me because I just love this franchise and where it goes. But I think all the problems and the weaknesses you pointed out are definitely there. And I think we even felt it at the time, but that was all we had. This was way before the MCU, way before the Spider-Man movies. It was like, wow, they're doing this. Wolverine is on screen. You get to see the claws, and you care about him because of what Hugh is doing. I think that's the genius of this movie. And then the second thing I think, and Jackman does this well too, but I again credit Singer, is they use the Wolverine character as like an audience surrogate, but also someone who like points out how silly everything is. Like the Han Solo, right? Han Solo in Star Wars, like, oh, the Force is silly. Like, why do we care about the Force? And it's a way to deflate a self-seriousness. And in this movie, he, makes fun of the uniforms. He makes fun of like, oh, what, like, what is your name? Wheels? Like, he's like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I think that's actually a line in the movie. He says that, which sort of calls out the silliness of everything. And that helps the movie not be too serious and helps the audience who aren't the geek fans into the movie, because they can kind of think, it is kind of silly. Oh, but the movie's telling me that. So, okay, this is not like, I can still love it. So I think that is brilliant. And I think Hugh uniquely can pull that off.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you also see, I don't know if they were trying for this, but like, yes, all of these people have gifts and they shouldn't be othered and all of that, but they are also dangerous in many ways. And I think Hugh embodies that. I think it's pretty important, because otherwise the argument would not be an interesting argument of what should happen, at a global stage, at a political stage, because you see in Rogue and him, like, these are not black and white heroes. A lot of these people are kind of in the gray. And I think you see that it's still is good and enjoyable, just not the best one, but
agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. So those were our first loves. Let's move on to the masterpiece selections here. So Karan, why don't you start with your Hugh Jackman masterpiece? What do you got for us?
So my masterpiece for Hugh Jackman is Bad Education from 2019. Quick log line on the movie. The beloved superintendent of New York's Roslyn School District and his staff, friends, and relatives become the prime suspects in the unfolding of the single largest public school embezzlement scandal in American history. Directed by Corey Finley, starring Hugh Jackman, of course, Ray Romano, Allison Janney. So I think this movie came, yeah, it's the year before the pandemic. I remember watching this on HBO. I think it might have even opened in theaters if things were handled differently, but it was
Mm.
released as like an HBO movie. And when I watched it for the first time, I was like, why is this an HBO movie? Like, this is kind of incredible and interesting. And I love this sort of a procedural, spotlight style, obviously very different subject matters, but, an investigative kind of movie, but also some interesting character development and characters in the middle of it. And the thing that I kept thinking about was Hugh Jackman. Like, and the reason I call this a masterpiece for him is that I think this is the movie where he's probably the most let loose yet most grounded.
Mm.
And I was, like I was saying in the beginning of our podcast, like for me he's charm central. And it's so interesting to me that when you are this sort of a charming person, what if that charm was twisted and you had some dark ugly secrets that you were hiding and you were using the charm to cover it all up? And in that sense, I think it's brilliant casting, but also pretty daring and brave of him, I think, to take a part like this. And you feel for this person because clearly something is really off, because this person thinks that they're doing the right thing. Meanwhile, they are hoodwinking everybody around them, not just money, but also people who are in their lives, even people who love them, actually. He's using everybody, and it's almost like at the end of the movie you sort of feel sad for him, but I think to me this is a masterpiece as a performance from him, because I think it's once again total commitment. The movie revolves around him, and it's so important that you're with him, because otherwise the stakes wouldn't matter, even though stakes are very high, but he's the central piece of it all. And I think it's by design that as an audience you have to feel some level of sympathy or understanding or something. And I think Hugh can do that because we've seen him do this, but also he has sort of this innate goodness inside of him, I think, and that you get glimmers of that even in this character who's actually pretty bad and is doing horrible things. So that's why I just think this is such a masterpiece performance. I will say, as a movie, like rewatching it again, I hadn't seen it since the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, I get it why this is a TV movie. I think I wish this movie in a different director's hand with maybe a different cinematographer. It has the potential in the subject matter and the performances to be a cinematic movie like a Spotlight or All the President's Men or all these movies that are so revered and kind of are in the pantheon. This movie could have gotten there, but I think the writing and the direction just doesn't fully get there. That said, I still find it quite, I know it's weird to use the word enjoyable for a movie like this, but I find it kind of enjoyable to see because it's just so interesting and how it all happens. And at the center of it is Hugh Jackman's performance. Had you watched this movie before?
No, I'd never seen it. I remembered seeing like posters, billboards for it in LA when it was coming to HBO. But I'm definitely glad I did. I really enjoyed the film. And a lot of it is due to Hugh. And I think what you were talking about in terms of what this character brings, which is sort of like a mixed, well, you think initially it's mixed morality. First, you think he's innocent because the
Yeah.
embezzlement only is his coworker. And then he's sort of doing the right thing and getting her fired. And you're like, okay, well, maybe he's doing some weird stuff and protecting her in some way, but like, okay, like I'm still with you. I'm with Hugh Jackman. And then it's revealed that, yeah, he is a villain. He's basically a sociopath for sure.
Oh,
Like he
yeah.
has a mental disorder where he thinks he is the most important thing in the world. And but he's denying that. Like that's what sociopaths do. And that slowly gets revealed as the movie goes along, I think that's to his credit as an actor to be able to pull off that slow switch, but yet you still, I mean, he's a bad guy. And this is a real person too. Like he did a
Yeah.
lot of horrible things in terms of stealing all this money from the school and school system and ruining a lot of different people's lives. You still have some kind of sympathy for him. I think
Mhm.
that's again what Hugh is bringing to this performance. He's able to do that, which is similar in a way to like Wolverine also being a character, which is a bit of like mixed morality. Like he's not always the good guy. He's sometimes an anti-hero. So I think this is sort of part of Jackman's persona a little bit, which is also why I think it works so well. But I was really impressed with the story, though I agree with you, the script could have been a lot better. They did some interesting choices, which, maybe we can talk about when we get more into the film. But Jackman, especially, I'm like, wow, like this is really just an incredible performance from him that I think deserved to be in a theatrical release. Just some other decisions they made, especially with the way that they told the story, in my view, just held it back and made it more of
Yeah.
a TV movie in scope. But I really did enjoy it. Fascinating story too, just what
Yeah.
this
What
guy
a great
was
story.
doing. Horrible. How much money
Oh,
he was able to take from the school system is crazy that he did this.
yeah. Pretty unbelievable. But yeah, I think there is that thing of kind of the anti-hero, but I think to me, what really takes it to that masterpiece level is that it has those innate, charming, magnetic qualities of Hugh Jackman as an
Hmm.
actor, but also what I associate him with. And you see that like parents and children and colleagues and everybody, they are enamored by him. And that's the subtlety of the performance is that there's something off though. And I remember feeling that even when the first time I saw it, of course, now I know, so you kind of know it, but there's something off. Even when he's trying to protect Allison Janney, there is, you can feel like the sweat at the back of the neck of
Hmm.
Hughes. That, oh, they're going to come for me too. But that's what sociopaths do. They deny it to themselves. And in fact, you see him rising as a hero to protect everybody, which also
Right.
is a cover up for their
Hmm.
own stuff, right? So it's just very layered in that sense. But again, a performance like this, I think could be played really over the top and hokey, but it feels quite restrained. And like I said, Hugh lovingly can be very over the top.
Hmm.
And I think kudos to him and I guess to the director as well for like holding that back because this could, and that would not work if this was sort of dialed up. It's
Agreed.
sort of in that right register, which is amazing. And then his look and all his, which are maybe that's a good thing of the script. I don't know how real it is, but like all his diet things and his beauty
Skincare.
regimens and
Right.
all of that. Like there's a lot of great detail in that sense, which kind of add to the full picture of a sociopath, but also just a human, you know? So it was fun to revisit him and for an actor who we primarily see as Wolverine to kind of play an ugly, really bad character, but also somehow make it sympathetic in a very stripped down movie. Like this movie is mostly in offices and school
Hmm.
buildings. You don't really go out much. It's pretty bare bones. And I don't think he has done much of that sort of stuff in
Right.
his career.
Right. He really has to shine. The acting
Yeah.
has to shine because the rest of it, not because they chose to do that because
Yeah.
the story needs to be about the actors and not about these big set pieces or elaborate, camera movements or editing techniques. But yeah, I think he's perfectly cast as a sociopath because, like you said, he can pull off the charm, but also then deliver the acting chops and pathos that's necessary to show how evil of a guy this is and why he's able to get away with it because he's able to charm everybody, but he thinks he's the hero too. He thinks he's doing the
Mm-hmm.
right thing because that's what sociopaths are. The interesting thing about the movie that I thought was maybe again a decision that I'm still not really sure what a better movie of this could have been. However, there is also parallel thread that in a way was more fascinating about a high school journalist who
Yeah.
essentially broke this story. And
Yeah.
that I was like, there's no way this is real. And then I Googled it and it is real. Like this was a real person who did do this investigation into the this school board that was embezzling this money. And that story is there, but then sometimes isn't really the focus. And this movie is essentially about the Hugh Jackman character, with
Right.
the side character being the teen journalist. But I was wondering, like, if they either made the teen journalist the focus, it would have been maybe a more interesting movie, or made it more of a two-hander where she's getting just as much of an examination and screen time and that investigation like a spotlight or all the president's like a journalist movie, which sometimes it goes into that, but it's basically more about a character study of this sociopath. And I just wonder if they would have balanced that a little better, it would have elevated this movie to just a more of a deserving of a theatrical release versus a video, a home box office HBO release. That I think that was what I don't know. How did you think that they handled the journalist portion of it? Did you want more of it? Did you feel like it was enough? I'm just curious because that was
Yeah.
what I was thinking when I
I think I
left the
was
movie.
fine with it because we've seen that before. You know, I think this was interesting to kind of see it from a Hughes kind of angle, but also just be part of this kind of school administration piece, you know.
Hmm.
It's not a world that I'm super familiar with. Obviously, we've all been to school in some form or the other, so you've got to kind of see it tangentially. But I thought that world building, if anything, that could have been done maybe a little bit more. Although you see
Hmm.
some of it, but I think that could have been highlighted more. But I was fine with the journalist part because that's a different movie, you
I
know. I
know,
think
right?
that could
Is that a
be
better movie? That's what I was asking myself at the end of
maybe,
this.
but then you wouldn't have the Hugh performance and you
I
wouldn't
know,
have, you know,
right?
this thing. And I sort of like the reveals of like he's closeted first at first you feel, but then you
Hmm.
find he, spoiler alert, has like a whole double life where he has a longtime partner. And I love that whole reveal and layer. Like this thing is not just about stealing money or what
Right,
have you,
right,
or this is much deeper and there's something a lot sicker and sociopathic going on over here. And but then also to see the impact he has on other people, right? I already mentioned the school and the parents and such and the colleagues, but also both of these guys that he's in sort of, you know, in a relationship with, they are kind of enamored by him. And that's
right.
another thing of sociopaths, right? That they can be very alluring and attractive. So I love like all of that exploration, which I think we wouldn't have gotten if it were a journalistic movie.
Right. Yeah. It is a two. It's like there are two different movies. I'm just wondering
Yeah,
maybe the balance necessarily wasn't right. Because yes, we've seen this kind of thing before, but the fact that it was a high school student, I thought was just
it's pretty amazing.
really cool that like she did this and did
Yeah,
the real journalism and all that kind of thing. So overall, I did think the movie was definitely. I highly recommend people check this
yeah,
out. It's like a kind of forgotten movie because it didn't get a theatrical release. People don't really know a lot about it, but I
yeah.
do think it was super interesting though. I will say again, talking about the something at the end of the movie, like I just did the last couple of these reviews, I didn't like they do in movies. It's like, okay, this is what really happened, and this is what the characters are today, and they have like sort of the text on the screen to update you on what happened. And the final thing that they put on there is, oh yeah, and this guy, because of some fluke, is still getting a pension of like $150,000. And I was like, okay, movie, like, what are you trying to make me think that pensions are bad now? Like, it was, I didn't like that. Like, politics, yes, this movie, there's politics and everything, right? But like that, I didn't feel was an unnecessary dig at like an audience to try to think, huh, oh, this guy shouldn't get pensions. Maybe pensions are bad. Maybe we should get rid of pensions. Like I just it rubbed me the wrong way. They should have removed that. It wasn't necessary. Like,
Oh,
what was the point of saying that other than to make me think, oh yeah, we should take pensions away, maybe? Like, why do we have these in the first place? Why are we funding them? And I think pensions are definitely a good thing that have been attacked unfairly over the years. And this movie, just that framing rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like that. That should have been taken out, in my
I
opinion.
didn't read it that way. To me, it was more of like the system is what it is, you know, and it sort of carries on. And I didn't think of it as a dig at pension, but more like someone like this person should not be getting a pension or
Why?
not be.
He did the work. The pension is he was administrator who deserve like he paid you pay into
Yeah,
pensions,
I
there are
guess that's
funds.
true.
It's like saying, oh, this a murder doesn't deserve social security checks. It's like I mean, actually, maybe legally they don't get them. I'm not sure, but I think if they paid into the system, no matter what, it doesn't disqualify you from getting a pension. I don't know.
Mm,
That just starting to like subtly seed those thoughts in people's minds, I think, is can be dangerous to
mm.
society. But I did like the movie. Just like I wish the filmmakers had taken that last part out. But thanks for putting it on the list. Again, I was happy to come across it. Now on to my masterpiece, which is Logan from 2017. The IMDb plot summary: in a future where mutants are nearly extinct, an elderly and weary Logan leads a quiet life. But when Laura, a mutant child pursued by scientists, comes to him for help, he must get her to safety. This is directed by James Mangold, the second James Mangold film we've had in the episode so far. Kind of cool coincidence there. Starring Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, and Daphne Keane. So this was the final Wolverine movie that Hugh Jackman did, and I had to put this as my masterpiece for him. Again, like I mentioned, I associate him so much just with the Wolverine character, and this I think was the culmination of several different movies, several different performances. Over at this point, it had been 17 years of inhabiting this character. And I think he brings all of that to this performance, which is a Logan and a Wolverine character that is also pushed to the brink. I mean, this is inspired by a really great comic book called Old Man Logan. It was like a mini series they did of
Mm.
an old Wolverine, and very, very different, involved a lot of the Avengers and different themes, but they took that premise and really gave you a world weary Wolverine that was pushed to the limit. And I think the acting that Hugh Jackman now has to do in this movie for the character is everything that he was subtly kind of doing in the background of all the other X-Men movies, the past weighing on him, him sort of fighting this animal instinct versus his humanity. These are all themes that Hugh Jackman had given hints of in this Wolverine character, but in this movie, it is the focus of the movie in the
Mhm.
themes of the film and Hugh Jackson's acting. And I think he just brings all of that to bear in this performance here. And in this movie, it's just incredible pathos he can bring to a character that yes, he didn't create the character, but I do think he created the cinematic version of it. A lot of
Mhm.
this was him, and just to see him put it as all in this film, I had to put this as masterpiece. We'll talk more about the film in a bit, but just curious on your thoughts on Hugh Jackman in this movie, or what your experience was like seeing Logan. I'm sure you saw it when it came
Mhm.
out.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the culmination, as we've been sort of hinting at the entire episode, of Wolverine character, but also his journey with him. Obviously, he's back now in this new movie, but yeah, I remember kind of watching this the first time and just feeling the weight that he's been carrying for all these years, like really been sort of splurged all out on the
Mm-hmm.
screen, on, in the dirt, if you will. And it feels really earned. And it's not just in the dialogue delivery or his walk, or the expressions on his face. His entire kind of being is sort of at this place. It's once again totally committed but really earned. And the other thing I would say is that there's like a restrained quality to this, because I think the Wolverine that we see obviously is younger as a character, but also Hugh is younger,
Mm-hmm.
and those movies obviously were meant as to be popcorn movies, so the tonality is different, and yet he's able to communicate pathos and everything that we've been talking about. But this movie, and thanks to James Mangold and I guess Hugh's own creative involvement as well, that
Mm-hmm.
they're able to sort of strip all that out and make this into a really dark and grounded movie where the stakes really matter. And whatever is going on with him, his relationship with Patrick Stewart and the little girl, like all of that feels really heavy and meaningful. But again, none of it would make sense if it were not him at the center of it, because
Mm-hmm.
he's amazing in the movie in an absolute sense, but then also is carrying the weight of all the previous movies that we've seen him do. And that's pretty genius, right? Like, we mock multiversal or sequel storytelling because usually it's done badly. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really, if an actor can do this in a good way with that kind of commitment, it shows the fruits of it. And I think this is like a great example of that.
It's a character study. I think that's what it
Yeah.
comes down to.
Yeah.
The Logan character and what he's dealt with and what he is still dealing with and how he deals with the challenges in this movie of having a clone who's basically his daughter. I mean, it's a clone of him,
Hmm.
but it's essentially a daughter. How he deals with Professor X in this movie too, who killed the X-Men essentially. They hint at that. So he's
Yeah.
sort of protecting and acting as a caregiver to this old man who's going through dementia. I mean, Patrick Stewart also, I just want to call it, his
It's
performance in this
amazing
movie
in
is
this.
incredible. How he can do this version of a Professor X who is racked with guilt but doesn't realize it because he's old. And the last speech he gives to Logan is just, even though it's actually not Logan, it's a clone of him, which is sad that he gives this heartfelt speech even though it's not actually Wolverine hearing it, where he finally just accepts his past and his mistake and feels almost it's like, I'm ready to die now because I've accepted what the horrible thing that I did, because maybe he couldn't control his powers anymore because he's old. They don't really kind of get into
Hmm.
that, but I love that that performance. But it does all come back to Jackman, and I think the structure of this movie too, with the girl and him having to protect the girl, harkens all the way back to the first X-Men. This, the lone
Right.
wolf and cub dynamic that he had with Rogue is taken even to the extent here. And I'm just a sucker for the lone wolf and cub type stories. I love, a jaded old man having to take care of a kid. I just always love those types of
Mhm.
stories. And I think this is a fitting end to the Wolverine character in these films, of having that be like the final thing that he does. When Logan is dying and he says to her, "Don't be who they made you." I mean, that's a lesson that he learned over these 17 years, and he's imparting on to his child as he dies. I think is
Right.
just so powerful and touching, and I just love that moment and this film. Which again, the film I think is brilliant too. The themes of Logan fighting with his past and then actually fighting with a version of him that is a younger version that is the more
Mm-hmm.
animalistic version of Wolverine is a great way to bring the theme into the action set piece. I think that was terrific. And yeah, the audience, they treat the audience with respect too. They don't spell out what's going on. It's like, why is Wolverine
Right.
losing his powers? They never really tell you what really happened to the X-Men. They never really tell you what really happened to all the mutants. They don't really tell you. And I like that it's great world building of like, yeah, this stuff happened. We're not gonna talk about it, but we're put enough in the background, you sort of get the situation, and then you can just make it about the characters and not about the plot and the world, and like
Right.
make it all these political statements, which the other X-Men movies were, which I love them for that. And a lot of that credit is also due to Stan Lee in terms of the creation of these characters. But this movie isn't really about that. It's about the character.
Right.
And I
Exactly.
just fantastic.
Yeah, it just makes the stakes. I mean, that, like I said, to me, that's always my complaint, and this just feels real
Mm-hmm.
and feels earned. I will say though, well, I felt it the first time I watched it, and also this time, which is that in one way, I'm happy that the violence of it is so real and the stakes feel high because of it. At the same time, it is pretty painful to watch, which I
Mm-hmm.
know is the point, but I don't know. Anytime children are involved in movies and that sort of violence is taking place, it's just not my favorite thing to watch. It obviously makes sense in the context of the story that they're telling and in the movie, but this is why this movie is not a rewatchable for me. It would be if it were not for that, because the rest of it is such a brilliant character study, like we've been saying. And, he's amazing, and all his interactions are amazing. The world building is amazing. The movie looks really great and feels really sort of tactile and not sort of, CGI bloat or any of that. But the child stuff, even though Daphne Keane, the actress, like her performance is amazing, it's a lot to
Mm.
take
I,
in.
I see. Yeah, the X-23 fighting that piece was just a little hard. Yeah, I hear in that. I tend to like those movies where kids do that stuff, so it works for me. But I totally get why that isn't something that is easy to see on screen. Though the violence too, which is hard to remember this because it's been so long since this movie came out, was also new for Wolverine. This is the first R-rated Wolverine
Right.
movie, and something that we've been waiting for as fans for a long time to see him really, cut people up and see the blood. And I mean, obviously, Deadpool and Wolverine was that taken to like the next level, which is much
Yeah.
more like accurate in terms of the comics. There's how much violence and blood there is in the comic book. But this movie, I thought, handled that really well, where it didn't feel like in Deadpool and Wolverine, the violence was there to be fun and funny and like awesome. And in the Logan violence, it was meant to be scary and I think hard to
Mm-hmm.
watch. And because the characters are under so much duress, and it's just a much more grounded and serious movie. So I totally understand your queasiness at seeing when X-23, and then also the rest of the Kid Mutants at the end too.
Oh
They're all
yeah.
in danger and they're getting attacked, and that stuff is always hard to watch. But I think important in these X-Men movies that they show the mutants under attack, because that's what makes these characters so interesting. That they're heroes, but they're never the alphas. They're always the minority. I think
Right.
this movie does a good job in that too. And also shout out to this movie breaking ground, I think, in killing Wolverine at the end. Something
Yeah.
that at the time was, I didn't really know whether they're actually going to do it. The first time I saw the movie, is he actually going to die? And he actually does die. And he's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they brought him back sort of now, but not that version of Wolverine. And after this, they killed James Bond. They killed Iron Man. They killed John Wick. I do give this movie credit to a IP franchise being willing to actually kill the main character of the
Right.
franchise. And that had not been done, I don't think, to the level that Logan did. So I just want to give Mangold and Hugh Jackman the credit for going there. And I do think it changed the game for IP blockbuster filmmaking.
Yeah. And it's fitting to the story, right? Like it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're going to do this because how cool
Right.
would that be? And blah, blah, blah. Like it feels that really earned
Hmm.
into the story. Like, where does this character go from here? Right. Like we've seen so much misery, so much pain that even though you're really sad for his death, but you also, at least I also sort of feel like, okay, you can be free now,
Exactly. Right.
This has been so difficult.
Right. and free for Hugh Jackman from this character, maybe too.
Also
Though
that.
obviously that,
Apparently not.
yeah, apparently not. But I think they handled in a way. I was worried actually with Deadpool and Wolverine they were going to ruin this incredible like final scene and moment and pathos of this movie. But I think they did a good job of not making that the Wolverine that comes back. It's a different Wolverine in Deadpool and Wolverine, but yet they
Sure.
still get to make fun of the this Wolverine by in the opening scene, Deadpool like just basically desecrating his corpse, which I thought was the right way to
Oh
handle
yeah.
this. I thought that was a brilliant way to be like, you know what, I have to be Deadpool, so I gotta like make fun of this somehow in a way that is inappropriate and over the top because I have to hide my pain or whatever Deadpool's going through. But they didn't invalidate this movie because this Logan does die, the Logan from
Right.
the movies that we've seen. And the Logan in that movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, was a different one. So I think they were clever, the writers, in doing that, because I was very worried that this movie wouldn't hit me the same way that it did, knowing where that he comes back. But in this rewatch, I still just was crying throughout the whole thing. And then definitely at the end, just always gets me every time. Especially with the Shane quote too, which is one of my favorite movies. Like, I'm about to cry again. That I just it's so well handled. Okay, now that we're done with our masterpieces, let's get into our wild cards. What is your wild card, Hugh Jackman, Karan?
I guess I'll keep the tears and the dread going. And also my theme of non-Wolverine movies. I was sort of intentional in that for Hugh because that's sort of the bulk of it, right?
Yeah,
But
it balances it out too.
it
Like,
balances it out. So my wild card for him is Prisoners from 2013, directed by Denis Villeneuve, starring Hugh Jackman, Jake Gyllenhaal, Viola Davis. Quick logline on the movie: when Keller Dover's daughter and her friend go missing, he takes matters into his own hands as the police pursue multiple leads and the pressure mounts. We have covered this movie on the pod before, I
the
think.
Denis Villeneuve
Denis
episode,
Villeneuve
which
episode,
was for
exactly.
Dune too, so folks can go
Yes.
back. I'll post the link below too in case you want to go back and listen to more thoughts on Prisoners.
I mean, this is obviously a hard watch movie, even though I rewatched it again for this podcast, which was a grueling, but really, how do I even say it, like satisfying time, because I do think this movie is kind of amazing. But I think I chose this for Hugh's wild card is that I think this is the first time at least I saw him portray a different character, especially he'd been doing Wolverine stuff for so long. And also a character that has no charm to him whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
That's my quintessential thing about him. Like he's stripped down of all of that. And as the title of the movie says, like everybody is a prisoner in this movie. And I think Hugh is probably the biggest prisoner in this movie.
Absolutely.
And there are, of course, connections with what is going on with Wolverine's story. But I do think you don't get Logan and that level of pain and pathos without Prisoners. I think something unlocked in him as I was thinking about watching these movies kind of back to back, because this came out before he made Logan. I think something unlocked in him and allowed him to go there. And that's why I put it as a wild card, because I think it took him on a slightly different direction to kind of really go deeper and explore and be willing to be ugly and, inside and out. Because it's not something, even though Wolverine is kind of a, gratuitous sort of not pretty character, he's still attractive,
Right.
at least
Right.
the way he's portrayed in the movies up till Logan. So I think this is the first time I just saw him kind of get dirty emotionally and physically and such. That's why this is my wild card. But as a movie, I mean, this is, the more I've watched it, the more I think that this is though super disturbing. And we now live in this, mini series kidnapping, killing thing that
True
we've been
crime.
true
Yeah.
crime, right?
Right.
Like there've been so many of those, and yes, it has elements of the investigation of what happens, but I think this movie is so much deeper than all of that meets the surface. And this sort of commentary about people being prisoners, no matter who you are, and everybody is sort of in the gray. And then the way that's captured in the performances, Roger Deakins' cinematography, Denis' direction, like you yourself are a prisoner actually watching this movie, and it stays with you. So, but yeah, I'll pause there and throw it back to you. I mean, we already talked about this movie, but yeah, curious how it felt this time, especially thinking about the movie from Hugh's angle.
Yes, like we did say, we did talk about the movie already, so I'll focus first on my thoughts on Hugh, which I definitely do feel this is the first time, at least that I can remember, where he played kind of it is a villain character. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
sympathetic in one way, but this guy overreacts to his kids going missing and definitely like tortures the person he thinks is responsible, and he's the one driving that. It's he's pulling Jake Gyllenhaal along and the other father. I don't remember that actor's name, but
Terrence Howard.
Terrence Howard, right? But it's him that is doing it. Like he's the instigator in this and pushing everyone forward. And you understand where his pain comes from, but it's shocking for me to see any person. It's Hugh, but it's also just any actor or character going through this level of pain and responding in such a horrible way, like turning into the darkest side of this person that could exist. That I think the performance is it, one of his best for
Hmm.
sure. That it's something he hasn't done before. Like you said, there is nothing charming about this guy. Even in the beginning, you can tell he's like a dad, but he's not like a charming, great, like father of the year kind of person. He's just, a normal kind of suburban dad that clearly has this darker side to him and these demons that have been him the entire time.
Yeah.
And this one thing opens those up. Like I don't think his kids being kidnapped and him thinking that it was Paul Dano that was doing it turned him into this person. I think he
No,
always had
it's
this
always
beneath the
been there.
surface. And Hugh Jackman does a really good job in a lot of the scenes that are the quieter ones. Yeah, the torture scenes are really hard to watch and terrible. And he's like, I don't say overacting, but it's like big acting. But it's those
Right.
smaller scenes when he's in the car, especially giving this one speech about how he
Yeah.
feels that is very understated and restrained. Not that theater kid energy we've talked about that maybe sometimes he can have. It definitely comes from a theater background, so it's in there, right? But he is restrained in that. I do think this is the movie, the parts of the movie that I respond to the most, like intellectually positively, is his performance. Like I'm not a Denis Villeneuve fan, like I
Right.
said. I'm actually surprisingly don't even like the cinematography in this movie. Like this movie just goes in places that I just don't. And it's not. I do feel like a prisoner. I feel like a prisoner in some like U.S. prison where I'm getting tortured or something like that. I don't like it. I don't like this movie. It's too venomous for me. But I definitely can recognize what Hugh Jackman is bringing to this performance, and it is incredible and one of his best performances for sure. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you kind of brought it into the conversation as just something else that Hugh does that he doesn't do very often. Like I don't see him going back to this type of very dark character. Even the sociopath he played in Bad Education was a charming guy who's also a
Right.
bad guy. But this guy is bad with really like no redeeming qualities, I don't think, in this movie.
Yeah. And I think this is the first time that I at least felt that I was not watching Hugh Jackman. I
Mm,
think he totally disappears into this character. Maybe it's because everything we know of Hugh Jackman is just not in this character, you know? And this is where I give credit to Denis and the whole cast and the writing and everything, that it kind of positions all these people in this light. And I think Hugh more so. Jake Gyllenhaal is great as well, but I
he's
think I've
great.
seen
Yeah.
Jake do that. And in
Hmm.
many ways, it feels like more of Jake's movie. And you see how he's kind of dealing with this and what are his own demons. And he's also driven in a different way, but he's channeling his demons in a positive way. And you get subtle hints of him losing it or what his background could have been, the tattoos and,
Right.
what have you. But I think Hugh is the most sort of out of control in this. But yeah, it's a very hard watch. It's a disturbing movie for sure. But I think that's what they're going for,
Oh,
you
I know
know?
it definitely is, and that's why I'm not like
Right.
I respect their artistic. They got what they did what they wanted. I mean, this goes back to again my issue with Denny of just he's too much of a pessimist and his worldview is too dark for me. I just don't respond to his movies often. But he is an artist, and that's his worldview. And this movie definitely represents that for sure. And it's just hard for me. It's just a hard
Yeah.
watch. It's a hard
It
watch.
is a hard watch for sure. I mean, I by no means wanted to revisit this movie, but from a pure artistic standpoint and what Hugh is doing, what everybody's doing, I'm glad I revisited it, even though it was such a hard watch. Okay, what is your wild card?
So my wild card movie for Hugh Jackman is The Fountain from 2006. This is a movie directed and co-written by Darren Aronofsky, starring Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz. And the plot summary, As a modern day scientist, Tommy is struggling with mortality, desperately searching for the medical breakthrough that will save the life of his cancer stricken wife, Izzy. That's one part of this movie. This movie has several plots going on in three different time periods. So that's just the
Mhm.
present day one. There's also a past conquistador trying to find the Fountain of Youth, and then a future story of a lone spaceman traveler in this bubble ship going to a star with a tree in it. That's sort of like, if people haven't seen this movie, that's kind of like the three things going on. And the reason why I chose this as my wild card, like I said, I had always associated Hugh Jackman with Wolverine, and he was Wolverine to me, even in the other movies I'd see him in around this time when he started branching out to non X-Men films more broadly. But this was the first time for me, at least, when I saw him I didn't think of Wolverine. I didn't see any of his Logan character and characteristics in this performance. And this to me made me view him more as okay, well, he's not just like a Christopher Reeve Superman, where Christopher Reeve was a good actor, but he'll always be associated with that character. I mean, obviously his career was cut a little bit short, but he is Superman like on and off the screen, and that's all the people will remember him for good reason. I mean, I love Christopher
Mhm.
Reeve, but this was the first time for me I realized, oh, okay, Hugh Jackman, when he hopefully in many, many years passes away and they write his obituary, obviously Wolverine will be mentioned in there, but it's not just going to be Wolverine. There will be other things. And this is the first movie to me that made me kind of realize that. Like, oh, this is
Mhm.
actually like a good, I don't want to say good actor, but it's someone with range outside of just playing Logan or different versions of Logan in other movies. And I'll get into more of my thoughts on the film too, because it is one of my favorite movies of all time. But yeah, like had you seen this before? What are your thoughts of Hugh in this movie? It's an interesting performance. Obviously, playing three potentially different characters, or maybe they're all the same character. And there's a lot
Right.
of questions about what this movie is. But curious on your thoughts on Hugh.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, this movie is probably the biggest display of his kind of theatrical roots because of that, because there's so
Mm-hmm.
much that he has to do and physically and how, these storylines kind of interact and how these characters are built up and performance style. Like he sort of has to do all of it. And I can't imagine that many number of people of this time frame and age group actually pull it off. And because there weren't that many leading men types, I guess, from the theater background that sort of made it. I think he gets to do all of that. I will say though, like the way Prisoners and Denis is not your thing, Aronofsky is not my thing because
Mm-hmm.
it's just too much, it's just too much. And this I tried watching this movie once before and I just couldn't get past the first sequence,
Mm-hmm.
but I was glad to sort of push through this time to appreciate at least the artistry and what he's trying to say and all the themes and the ideas. Like I get all of that, but it's just too much, and that's how I always feel, other than Black Swan, I think.
Mm.
Not that I've seen all of his movies, maybe not, but that's usually what I feel. In fact, if there is a theater kid in a director's body, it's Aronofsky.
He dials everything up to 11. And
Everything up.
that I respond well to, and why I like him as a
Right.
filmmaker. And but you raise an interesting point with Hugh Jackman actually too, of you need in an Aronofsky movie, especially
Yeah.
this one, you need to be big, and Hugh can deliver on that. Actually, the original actor was Brad Pitt that was supposed to be in this movie when it was like four times the budget. It was this big thing, and then they kind of got scaled down.
I
And I
see.
just don't think that Pitt
No.
would have worked in this. Even the other version of this movie that it was a lot more epic at scale. But I don't think Brad Pitt would have worked in the movie as much as Hugh Jackman does, because he matches the energy of Aronofsky, which is, yeah, very big, dialed up to 11 on everything. And that's just how he delivers his art, which Hugh Jackman fits into that mold well. I think that was interesting. I never thought about that before, of like, he actually is perfect casting in that
Yeah.
sense. Like, very few movie stars have that, yeah, theater kid energy, which isn't like a knock to all the theater kids out there. Like, we're not knocking that. It's just a certain vibe and energy that is an expression that, at least when I say it, I don't mean any kind of judgment or say it's a bad thing to have that type of energy. It's just a very certain type of energy that works sometimes and doesn't work others. But this is a movie that is all of that type of energy. So I think he works really well in it.
Yeah. I totally agree. But yeah, this movie, It's a
Yeah.
lot. I feel like I'm still recovering from this movie.
Oh, really? It's only like an hour and a half, which is always so. Every time I watch this, I'm like, it feels like you just watched some,
Yeah.
2.5 hour epic thing, and it's like it's
Yeah.
only 90 minutes basically, and
True.
it's really not. The sets are kind of small. Like when you kind of think about it too, it's like there's
Yeah.
only like two actors, three actors, just a lot of themes, a lot of rumorations on death and what that means and how what life means and all these large themes. But
Mm-hmm.
the scale of the movie in a weird way is kind of small. I felt that at least on this. I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen this movie like a dozen times at least. I hadn't seen it maybe in like 2 years, but this on this watch, I really noticed that yeah, it's actually really not that big. It just feels big because of the
Right.
energy that Darren and to your point, Hugh Jackman
You.
also puts into this. It just feels like you're experiencing some big thing when it's not really that big
No.
on paper at least.
Yeah. And that's sort of my thing, right? Like when you have, I feel that imbalance. And that's what I feel with Aronofsky often, that if the canvas was bigger, then the dialing up to the 14 would,
Hmm.
just have more room to breathe and sort of land on you versus here, because the vessel is small, but there's like so much packed into it, so much coming out of it. You
Hmm.
have to be, really ready for it. And you either are or you're not.
Yeah, he definitely is a polarizing filmmaker in that sense. Even again, he's one of my favorites, but someone when he misses bad. Like
Oh, yeah.
Mother, I can't
Because of
stand.
that. Yeah.
But The Fountain is one of my favorite movies. Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan. Like when he hits, like it's just it totally works for me. And this movie too, like every time I see it, also it's sort of one of those films that unlocks different meanings, and I look at it a different way at a different stage of my life. Because originally I thought it was a lot more of a love story and like a romance when I first saw it 20 years ago, and now just as an older person, I could definitely see this being a lot the themes of death and
Right.
coming to terms with your own mortality and viewing death as part of life and it just as natural as being alive as opposed to some disease, which is what Hugh Jackman's character is hanging on to. Oh, it's something terrible, we hate death, we got to fight it, we got to it's unnatural, even though actually it's the most natural thing
Hmm.
that the humans will go through. That part it resonated with me a lot
Yeah.
more deeply on this time, and the three stories too. Every time I see the movie, I seem to interpret each one in like a different way, and not only in terms of what it is, but what it's trying to say and how it connects back to the main themes of this movie, which again are about death, mortality, living life in the moment, because that is what death is as natural as life, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. It's one of those movies for me, at least, that every time I see it, it think about it in a different way, which is cool.
Yeah.
I do like movies like that continue to challenge me. I feel different things every time I see it, and I did on this rewatch, like I said. And I also want to call out too, just the score is one of my favorite
Yeah.
film scores
Great
of all
score.
time. Like I listen to this a lot. It's just incredible. Clint Mansell, I think, is his best
Yeah.
work on this
And
movie.
their collaboration has been amazing over the years. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it definitely has that quality. I can see, even though I only seen it the one time, that it has sort of that the more you come back to it, you'll find other meanings. It's just that all of his work, because it's so dialed up and it's self-aware that, oh, you're going to find all these meanings here. It has sort of that school project
Oh yeah, no, I
energy
hear you.
to it,
Yeah, yeah.
which rubs me not in the best way. Because like, oh, this, that, oh, you're going to find different meanings as you grow. And I kind of feel that. And that puts me at a distance as
Right.
opposed to somebody who's sort of more chill about it and let the audience sort of just do that. But yeah, there's like a spoon feeding sort of quality to it because of how he does it. But that said, to make a movie like this on a lesser budget, to pack in all these ideas, get these performances out, that takes something.
Oh, absolutely. And I think much like my rubbing up against Denis Villeneuve's sort of approach to film and to art, but he is an artist. Like that makes these people like Aronofsky and Denny not just like journeyman filmmakers. They have a very specific point of view, and because each individual person has their own points of view too, either you really connect with it or you rub up against it. And I think that's always fascinating. I actually like that we talked about both of these filmmakers and movies kind of back to back, because it opens up these interesting conversations we have on this show where yes, there's a lot of things that we share in common, but we are two different people that have,
Right.
different, as everyone is different, right? And I like when we find these either filmmakers or movies that really work for one of us, but don't for the other person, and just exploring the space in between that. I always find
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. And it makes me appreciate these movies more when I hear the things that rubs you the wrong way, and then I'm sure it does the same thing for
Yeah,
you. It's fun. Like I like that this can when this happens, and it's just fun and happen back to
totally.
back on a filmmaker is one of my favorites, and I don't like Denny, and you're the opposite of it. It's just fun to talk about those movies.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So I guess speaking of filmmakers and movies, what do we think you should do next?
For me, like they said in the Deadpool Wolverine movie, he should be playing Wolverine till he's 90. I now am very averse to whenever they do bring the X-Men into the MCU, however they're going to do that in the next like 5 years. I don't really see how they can get around the mark that Hugh Jackman has left on the character of Wolverine. So I want him to continue making Wolverine movies whenever they need him. I trust that character is in good hands because he has such a protection, like a protective quality over how the character is portrayed. And so I trust him, much like I trust him with Deadpool Wolverine. So I trust him to make the right decisions on there. So I want him to continue to do that. And I do also think that he should continue to. We didn't talk about any of these other movies like The Greatest Showman or even like Australia, the more kind of
Mhm.
theatrical movies, or Les Mis. And this is where his passion is. He started on the stage. And I
Right.
want to continue to see him make those movies possible by being in them. I like your Gene Kelly kind of comparison at the beginning of this episode, like song and dance man, for lack of a better. He can do both.
Hmm.
And there's so few movie stars that are bankable today that could do that. He has the power to bring to the screen a lot of stories that never would get made if it wasn't for him saying, yes, I'm going to lend my box office credo to this. Like, again, I haven't seen Greatest Showman, but I can say that I don't think that movie ever would have been made if he hadn't
No.
stepped in there and said, you know what, I'll put my name on this because it's a musical. It's probably not going to do well, but at least you have Hugh Jackman in it, so we have a chance to return our money. And that I think is cool, and I want him to continue to make those movies possible. That's what I would like to see from him. What about you?
Yeah, I think for me, I have two camps. Like one, I would love for him to actually work with some really good directors. I mean, I appreciate that he worked with Denny and that's, unlocked something new in him. But for somebody who's been around for so long and has been like a movie star and also a really good actor, he's not really worked with that many top directors, a few, because he's mostly been doing Wolverine. So I think I would
Mhm.
love for him to work with a Spielberg or somebody like that, and see what they can do and maybe cast him in kind of a maturer, understated role and switch the charm in a different way. I think that would be interesting because I would love for him to have that kind of a movie on his roster. I don't think he has that kind of a big movie with like a big epic director, so
Mhm.
that's sort of one. And then second, on the song and dance piece of it, yeah, it'll be great for him to, I don't know what other character of, past times or present times that might fit into that mold. But I would love to for him to make a musical, maybe I know they're making a Gene Kelly biopic. Maybe he
Mhm.
plays the older version, maybe there's a different movie. So that could be fun. I will say though, I'm not a fan of his singing. As much as I like him
Oh.
as an overall package, it's a lot of one day more. This stuff is like it just every sentence is that kind of singing. It's like too much.
Mhm.
So
Too much
maybe
too much
somebody
stage,
can,
like too much
huh?
of the stage musical kind of tone to it,
Yeah,
you mean?
and I'm sure there's a technical term to it, but like he sings like that, with
Oh, the
like
vib- the vibrato, the vibrato.
vibrato.
Yeah,
It's
that's
too
the
much.
yeah. Okay, okay.
So somebody has to dial that down and maybe use it in a different way.
Uh-huh.
I didn't mention it. I did see him on Broadway at the
Oh.
Music Man, and
Oh.
it was amazing to see him really come to his own, command the stage, and you can feel it when somebody's doing something that they love. It comes through. So that was pretty fun.
Nice. Yeah, that's one of my favorite musicals, and that must have
Yeah.
been really cool to see that not only live on Broadway, but to have Hugh Jackman do that role. So the Deadpool line about threatening to have Hugh Jackman sing the second half of Music Man with no rehearsals, you knew what that was a real threat to you then, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of what's up next for this show, we're entering into August now, and we've actually really enjoyed this new format. I think we've gotten a lot of great feedback from our listeners as well about picking a filmmaker, actor, director, and how's a new movie coming out where we get to explore that new film and then get into that director or actor's filmography a little bit with our own personal choices. But this next 2 episodes, we're doing a bit of a different thing. So we are picking not new movies, but older films that meant a lot to us, but that are having anniversaries this year, and then talking about the filmmaker or the studio that involved in those films. So our next episode is going to be on North by Northwest, which is celebrating its 65th anniversary this year, and discussing Alfred Hitchcock, which is both one of our favorite directors. So that'll be a really fun episode for us. And then after that, we're covering Mary Poppins, which also has an anniversary, a 60th anniversary. And we'll be discussing Disney's live action films, which will be really fun and interesting. So I'm looking forward to both of those episodes. So we're taking a bit of a break from new movies for a while, but we'll be back in the fall. There's a lot of big movies, Oscar movies, blockbuster movies in the fall. So we'll be back covering those new movies then. So I'm really excited for these next 2 episodes.
Yeah, me too. What a turn between Hitchcock and Disney.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of things, I think, between those two men in terms of impact on the industry, both businessmen, but also artists. I think I'll start thinking about some parallels maybe we can run between those 2 people. But both meant a lot to me and still do. So I'm really excited for that episode.
Me too. Well, with that, that's our episode. Hope you enjoyed our discussion today on Hugh Jackman and the new Deadpool and Wolverine movie. Be sure to let us know in comments with your thoughts on that. As always, we are available here on YouTube, but also all the leading podcasting platforms. So don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. And also please rate and review us and like this video, as that really helps listeners find us. With that, see you next time.
See you next time. In 1852, Elijah Graves Otis invented the safety brake for a lifting platform. 1 year later, in 1853, he founded the Otis Elevator Company in Yonkers, New York. The Otis Elevator Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of United Technologies Corporation.